All right, let's get right into it. Today we're looking at a legal case from the Philippines that is just wild. It's about how a simple marriage certificate held a secret that almost completely unraveled a family's history. We're talking about a typo, a case of mistaken identity, and a legal fight that went all the way to the Supreme Court. But before we dive in, let me just ask you this. Think about it for a second. If you're married, are you 100% sure every single piece of paper is perfect? I mean, if you had to stand up in court and prove your marriage was the real deal, could you actually do it? Well, it's a question one woman was forced to answer, and what she found was just staggering. You see, when she went to check her official records, she discovered the marriage license number, the one printed right there on her certificate, it wasn't for her and her husband at all. No, it belonged to two complete strangers. So you have to be asking, how in the world does something like that even happen? Well, to figure that out, we've got to meet the couple at the heart of this story and look at the bizarre piece of evidence they stumbled upon. Okay, so this is Lavelle and Henry Cariaga. Their story starts out pretty normally. They meet in college, Lavelle gets pregnant, and they get married back in 2000. For the next 13 years, they build a life together, have 2 more kids. But by 2013, things had fallen apart, and they separated. So a couple years go by, and Lavelle decides it's time to make the split official. She starts the process to get the marriage nullified. Her lawyer gives her some pretty standard advice. Hey, just to be safe, head down to the Quezon City Civil Registry and get a copy of your marriage license. Just make sure all the I's are dotted. And right there, that's where this whole story just completely goes off the rails.
So Lavelle gets this official certification from the registrar's office, and right away, the first part is a bombshell. It basically says that for the license number on her marriage certificate, number 131078, the office has no record it was ever issued to her and Henry. But believe me, it gets weirder.
Because the document didn't just say the license wasn't theirs. It went on to say that, yes, license number 131078 is a real license, but it was issued to a Mamerto Yamba and an Amelia Parado, 2 people they had never even heard of. The very foundation of Lavelle's marriage, the piece of paper that made it all official, it was basically a phantom.
So Lavelle walks into court with what seems like a slam-dunk case, right? I mean, she has official proof. But what should have been a simple process quickly turned into this incredibly frustrating legal nightmare.
And what happened was this bizarre legal standoff. On one hand, you have Lavelle's argument, which is super simple. Look, the license number is for someone else. Our marriage was never valid. But the lower courts, they took this incredibly strict, literal view. They said, well, hold on. This certificate only proves that this specific number wasn't yours. It doesn't prove that you weren't issued a different license with a different number. It's just mind-boggling logic. And this kicked off a whole journey of rejection. First, the regional trial court just throws her case out, saying her evidence wasn't good enough. So she appeals. And the Court of Appeals, they actually agree with the lower court. They even dismissed her own testimony, where she said they never even applied for a license as self-serving. It was like the courts were asking her to prove a negative, which is pretty much impossible. At this point, she's out of options. So Lavelle takes her case to the last stop, the highest court in the Philippines, the Supreme Court. This was it, her final shot. Now, to really get what a huge hurdle she was facing, you need to understand a legal idea called the presumption of validity. All it really means is that the law's default setting is to assume every marriage is legit. You have to come with some seriously clear and convincing evidence to prove it's not. The system is built to protect marriages, not tear them down easily. So the whole case, after all this time, came down to one single question. The lower courts had already said her evidence wasn't strong enough to overcome that big presumption of validity. So the question for the Supreme Court was simple. Was it? Was a certificate showing her marriage license actually belonged to 2 strangers enough to say a 15-year marriage never really existed in the first place?
And the way the Supreme Court answered that question, well, it brought a really important shift in legal thinking, something they called a holistic approach.
The justices basically looked at what the lower courts did and said, nope, that's not right. They rejected that super narrow, rigid way of looking at the evidence. They said you can't just expect a document to have some kind of magic words on it. You got to look at the whole picture. So what does holistic approach actually mean? It's really just common sense. It means a court has to look at everything together. Don't just pull out one document and ignore everything else. You have to consider the certificate in its full context. Listen to what the people involved are saying, like Lavelle testifying they never even applied, and just look at all the facts of the situation. It's about getting to the truth, not just playing word games.
And the court wasn't just making this up on the spot. They were actually building on their own past decisions. In a case called Castro, they'd already said that a certificate saying a license cannot be found is good enough. In another, Abbas v. Abbas, they said a certificate is still valid even if it doesn't have the phrase, despite diligent search. And they pointed out that Lavelle's situation was nothing like the Sevilla case, where a registrar's office admitted its files were a total mess. Lavelle's certificate, on the other hand, was crystal clear.
Okay, so with this new holistic way of looking at things, the Supreme Court was finally ready to hand down its decision. And in doing so, they were about to set a huge new precedent for the law in the Philippines. And after this long, exhausting fight, the Supreme Court sided with Lavelle, unanimously. They declared her marriage to Henry void ab initio, which is a legal term that just means it was invalid from the very, very beginning. Because at the end of the day, when you look at all the evidence together, the number of valid marriage licenses ever issued to Lavelle and Henry was, well, it was 0.
The court's logic was really straightforward. The certificate wasn't vague. It clearly gave the license to someone else. Lavelle's testimony matched that perfectly. And here's the key part. The court said once she presented that powerful evidence, the responsibility flipped. It was now up to the state to somehow prove another real license existed. And they couldn't. When you put all those pieces together, the conclusion was obvious.
And this is the real takeaway. Why this case is so important beyond just this one family. It set a huge precedent. It's a message to all the lower courts that they can't just throw out a case because a form isn't worded exactly how they want. They have to look at the whole story, use their common sense, and find a just answer.
But it does leave you with one last, kind of spooky thought. This whole legal battle happened because of one bureaucratic mistake that nobody noticed for 15 years. And it just makes you wonder, how many other people's lives are built on a piece of paper with a critical error, just sitting there, hidden in a dusty file cabinet somewhere, waiting to be found?